Hey, we apologize for the technical challenges as we tried to go live earlier. We should be live now with our introduction to Azure Pipeline Stream. If you're not seeing us live, let us know. Oh, well, you wouldn't be able to let us know in the chat. So, yeah, we should be live now. Yeah, please. It says we're live now, so again, apologies for any technical difficulties we had earlier. So this is part one of our three-part series for Introduction to Azure Pipelines. Really excited to be with you live now. This is a three-part series where we're going to go deep into Azure Pipelines from our .NET developer perspective. Really excited to share this series that I haven't been able to do in almost 2 years. I look back and I um I couldn't believe it because I said, "Yeah, it felt like it's been 2 years." Turns out February 2020 was the last time I did this series, February 2020. So it's been almost exactly 2 years. We're 1 day past 2 years. So that was a pretty exciting note to find. So February 2020, and the fun thing about Azure Pipelines is a lot of the technologies is almost identical. Very few things have changed other than the version numbers of different services, but the fundamental concepts are almost completely identical. So this is the first part of the three-part series where we go over the fundamentals of Azure Pipelines, some of the core concepts that you're going to need to know to be successful when we get into continuous integration and continuous deployment. So if you're watching this live, we're going to teach you all the basics that you'll need to know to build your first pipeline. If you're watching this as a recording, you're probably jumping in from the continuous integration, continuous deployment session because you're wondering, well, what is this thing Sydney showing me? And he's probably telling me that I need to jump back to the first session and refresh my memory. Well, this is the session I told you to jump back to where we go over the basics. So this is the fundamental knowledge you're going to need to build pipelines using YAML from scratch so that you can go off and do some really amazing deployments. So let's all just do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we're going to be doing a lot of from scratch YAML. So just jumping in, real quick housekeeping slide. I'm Sydney Andrews. I'm the host of this live session. I'm an Azure MVP and a Microsoft certified trainer. Like to always give two links at the very start. If you got questions or if you need any help with the series, we got msusdev at Microsoft.com. Once again, that's msusdev at Microsoft.com. You're going to see me pop this up every once in a while as a nice little banner, msusdev@microsoft.com. That's our email address. We're here if we can help in any way. If you come up with a question after the fact, if we don't answer your questions in the chat, yeah, feel free to email us. If we can't answer it, we'll find somebody who can. The other link is going to be our slide decks and source code, github.com/msusdev end-to-end CI/CD. We are open sourcing our slide decks. We are open sourcing our samples. We like to do that. That way you can follow us as we design these webinars. We try to keep it open source so that these presentations evolve as we evolve the way we teach people how to use GitHub Actions, Azure Pipelines, how we think about the way we teach CI/CD to the wonderful YouTubers. All right. So real quick, just talking through these seminar, I forgot to remove session 4 here, and I apologize because I just ignore the session 4 here. But there's 3 sessions here, and I will just skip past this slide. Really talk about with this presentation, we're going to talk about Azure DevOps, what it is, Azure Pipelines. We're going to build a really simple .NET application. We're going to build a workflow, a pipeline for that application. We're going to customize that pipeline, and then we're going to talk about using that pipeline in the context of containers. And I apologize about that last slide. I knew I was going to have one outdated slide. That's big mistake on my behalf. I knew I was due for one mistake today. That's my one mistake. I get one every day. The wonderful thing about this is that we are going to dynamically work on this pipeline. So we're going to start with a pipeline. We're going to take one of the jump start pipelines that they give you, one of the templates. We're going to just look at that one and say, hey, that's a template, and then we're going to build one from scratch and iterate it over it throughout the day. And I'm just going to show you different versions of it, and we'll build on it so you can see how you can build one from scratch. So let's talk about Azure Pipelines, which is one of the components in the suite that is Azure DevOps. So Azure DevOps is a suite of services for you to implement the automation of different things as you implement DevOps within your organization. Now, Azure Pipelines is essentially a service in and of itself. It allows you to implement workflows for any language, any platform, any cloud. Now, a lot of people think Azure DevOps and Azure Pipelines, that means they must be used together. And that's not necessarily true. As a matter of fact, all the demos I'm going to show you today are going to use Azure Pipelines with GitHub. And you probably saw that when you saw the title for today's session. Azure Pipelines don't have to be used with .NET. They don't have to be used with Azure Repos. They don't even have to be used with Azure. Today, we're going to use Azure Pipelines with code hosted on GitHub. But you don't have to use Azure Pipelines to push code to Azure. You use Azure Pipelines to push code to AWS or Google Cloud. You use Azure Pipelines to build stuff to deploy to machines on your local infrastructure. You can use Azure Pipelines to push packages to GitHub packages. Azure Pipelines are just runners that can run logic. And whatever that logic is really up to you. Whatever makes sense for your own organization. If you need to run some automation to test UI functionality for maybe some front end automation for integration testing. You can use Azure Pipelines for that. If you want to extend it to do some containerization, maybe some smoke testing that's needs to be automated for your organization. You can use it for that. The idea for Azure Pipelines is just extensible automation that you can use for your organization. Now, I don't really want because I want to get away from this idea of hey, I'm trying to sell you on what pipelines are, and I don't want to get all the word I'm trying to find here is that I'm not really trying to pitch pipelines here to you. I rather show than tell, right? And so what I like to do is I like to just go in and just explain from an academic perspective what pipelines are. Pipelines are really broken down academically into a series of stages, jobs, and steps. And so today's webinar, we're going to do this in a context of a .NET developer. So for a pipeline, we can think of a stage, maybe if we're a .NET developer, somewhere where maybe we can build our project in one stage, and maybe we can set our project to production in another stage. We could think of our jobs as maybe doing things as like using our command line interface to build and test our application. And maybe we'll use our command line interface to push our application to Azure, maybe deploy it to our cloud. And then maybe within these jobs, we could take steps to do things like within our build job. We can take a step to restore our packages from our package manager, and then maybe build our application. During our test job, we can take a step to build our application, then take a step to run the unit tests. Within the push to Azure job, we could take a step to push to our Azure container instances, and then maybe take a step to actually validate that was pushed successfully to Azure. So just walking backwards through this, I just want to walk you through that one more time. We have our stages, our jobs, and our steps. And we think of every pipeline broken down to those three things with stages, jobs, and steps. Using our .NET example again, and this can be translated to any programming language. We maybe have a continuous integration, continuous deployment stage. And again, this is infinitely flexible. I'm just giving you an example, and this is what I like to use. Um, we might have a continuous integration, continuous deployment stage. We might have a build and test step, or excuse me, build and test job, and push to Azure job. And within those jobs, we might have steps to restore our packages and build our project within the build job, to build our project and uh, run the unit test within our test job, and steps to push to our container registry and validate that the container image is valid that. I said container registry. I meant a container app or container instance, and then validate our container instance is actually running correctly. Now, I said steps. Now, steps could be two types of things within a pipeline. They can either be just a arbitrary script, like a hello world, like echoing something out from the script, or just some type of built-in bash script command like dir, or it could be something that's useful to some type of command line tool, like for instance the .NET CLI, .NET build. Or Azure Pipelines has lots of built-in tasks. Like for instance, there is a publish to Azure task. There's a task to create an Azure Pipelines artifact. There is a push to GitHub task. And these built-in tasks usually are useful tools that would encapsulate multiple lines of scripts. So for many common functions, you can use a built-in task rather than write 10, 15 lines of scripts. So usually you have multiple built-in tasks that would normally take 5 to 10 lines of script. So when we talk about steps, you can either choose to use a line of script or you can use a built-in task. Now, I'm breaking this down academically because what we're going to do is we're going to look at different flavors of pipelines and we're going to build out pipelines. You're going to see both variations. And I'm just kind of breaking this down right before we go into writing things. So I'm going to show you a starter pipeline that leans heavily towards the right-hand side of this diagram, where they're going to use a whole bunch of built-in tasks. Then we're going to build our own pipeline that we're going to lean heavily towards the left-hand side of this diagram, where we're going to do almost all command line scripts. So let's build a starter pipeline. This is going to require us to create our own project in Azure DevOps and create our own pipeline tied to GitHub repo. So let's get hands on. Let's have some fun. So let's show you what I got. I have a blank browser window. Yeah, the most exciting thing in the world. Dev.azure.com. That takes me to Azure DevOps. I have a blank project called msusdev here. Oh, blank organization, excuse me. I'm going to create a project. I'm just going to create a project called Simple Console. And I'm going to create a public project. I'm going to hit create project. Now, if you have a new organization, you actually have to go into that organization and enable the ability to create a public project. It's not enabled by default. Now, I have a project called Simple Console that's public within MSUS Dev organization. And I'm going to go to Azure Pipelines. I'm going to create a pipeline. Now, I logged in using my GitHub account. So if I click GitHub, I'm going to have access to all the GitHub repos that my GitHub account has access to. Now, I have access to a lot of GitHub repos because I contribute to a lot of different projects. And if you contribute to a lot of different ones, you may actually have to go in and configure, which repos you want to grant access to. And as you can see, I have access to a lot of repos. So I'll have to filter down to, what repos I want to grant access to. Now, just, for today, I'm going to flip over and I'm going to go to github.com/msusdev examples. This is just a little test organization I created where we're going to create our today's sample repository. So we're going to hit new. We're going to create a little sample repository for today. We're going to call this March 1st. It's just going to be a nice public repository, and I'm going to add a README file. That way we don't have to init a new repository. So hit create repository, and we are going to have a empty repository. Now, I'm going to have a little bit of fun. I'm going to use GitHub code spaces. I'm really proving out to you that we can use a variety of tooling here. I'm proving to you that I don't have to be in Azure DevOps to use Azure Pipelines. So I'm going to go over to code spaces, and spin up a new GitHub code spaces. So here we go, set it up with code space. I'm relying on another tool live in the demo, and this was not part of my demo plans. I'm just having fun. All right. And at any time, you can throw anything in the YouTube chat if you got any questions. All right. .NET. Got to type in .NET version. So this should be running .NET 6. Yes, it is. Going to .NET new console to create a new console app. So I have a new .NET console app. Should just say hello world. Console right line, hello world. Perfect. So if I type .NET run, so just print out hello, comma, world, exclamation point. Variety is the spice of life here. So I'm going to .NET add package colorful.console. That's a nice little package that allows us to write ASCII art. So instead of hello world, I'm going to be using console equals colorful.console. That allows me, instead of typing colorful.console.write ASCII, just say console.write ASCII. Just a nice little shorthand. So I should just be able to type in .NET run and print out some ASCII art. Hello world. There we go. Really simple stuff. The only thing changed here really is my CS project file. I have a package reference to Colorful Console. So really simple change. Going to make this Visual Studio ready by adding in a solution file. So .NET new SLN, so new solution file. And .NET SLN add um, March 1st.cs project. So that's adding my CS project file to the solution file. And just to show you what that does is just adding that CS project file to the solution file. So we have a solution that includes our project. Our project is a console application. If you go to the source control, you'll see it's trying to add all of the bin and object files to source control. That's bad. So we need to add a .NET new git ignore. I'll just git up the .NET standard git ignore file. Now our source control tab looks a little bit more sane. It's a git ignore file, our CS project file, a C# file, and our solution file. Just 4 files. That looks pretty normal. I'm looking around. Nothing really looks out of place. Maybe I don't know if GitHub Codespaces supports um colors in the font window. Let's try this. I'm really freestyling here using system drawing colors dot yellow or red .NET run color dot red. I know write ASCII supports the ability to print out a color. Yeah. Okay. All right. We're having fun now. So we'll do this as our initial commit of our code. So we now have a console app with a solution file, CS project file, prints out ASCII art in the red color. Everything looks good. So I'm going to close Visuals. Well, I'll leave code spaces open. I'll go back to this project. Everything's in here. Everything looks good. I'll go back over here. I'm probably going to need to do this again just to refresh the list of repos. So I'll go to GitHub. All repositories. March 1st. Now it's going to say, hey, we need to install Azure Pipelines on March 1st to give it access to that repository. Do I approve? Yes. Need to log in. Yes, I give it access. Talking to my Azure DevOps organization. All right. Which pipeline template do I want to use? Do I want to type my own or do I want to use a template? Now, later on, we're going to type our own, but right now we're going to use a template. So we'll use the .NET Desktop template. Now, this is a template. Right now, I do not expect you to understand what's going on here. It has a trigger. It's going to use a image for the agent from a pool of images, has some variables set up, has some steps, and we're going to walk through all this in a second. And it has 3 tasks. And yeah, let's start here. So we're going to start with this template. We're going to hit save and run. It's going to create a commit in my repository called Setup CI with Azure Pipelines. It's going to commit it directly to the main branch. Hit save and run. So here's an interesting thing that happened. So if we go back to my repo and refresh, we have our new Azure Pipelines.yaml file with our YAML file. Our Azure pipeline is running. So if we go to our job status, we'll see that it's initializing the job. It's looking for an agent. using that VM image, Windows latest. If we go to the code space, you notice it hasn't pulled the file down yet because think of this as like your local machine. It's a machine. So we need to actually pull in order to get that YAML file. Let's see. All right. We now have an agent running the job. It's checked out our code. It's now installed NuGet. NuGet is pulling down packages, restoring the .NET packages. So it's restoring packages right now. It's about 28 seconds right now. We know there's only one NuGet package that we really care about, which is the colorful console package. Once this installed that console package, the next step will be to run Visual Studio build. That's going to require the solution file, the Visual Studio test, and then it will be done. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening here. We have a trigger that says, oh, any commit to the main branch, pull an agent that uses the Windows latest image. We have three variables. Look for a solution that matches this pattern .sln. Use any CPU build platform. Use the release build configuration. Use the task NuGet tool installer. That means install the NuGet tool on this agent. Excuse me. Restore the use the NuGet command restore on the whole solution. That means store all NuGet packages. Use the Visual Studio build command for the entire solution, and then use the Visual Studio test command. Again, use the build platform configuration variables for the entire solution. So these are built-in tasks. We're not running individual scripts. We're using built-in tasks to actually run these Visual Studios build and test. So that's just like when you're running Visual Studio on your local machine. You're saying build and test. You're trusting that underneath the hood is running the appropriate build and test commands, and you just trust that Microsoft knows what's the best build and test commands. It's the same concept here. It's just a lot of stuff going on underneath the hood. Now I see somebody say hey in the chat. If you got any questions, feel free to send those questions in the chat. We'll definitely try to answer these questions while we're rolling here on the live stream. Let's double check this. Looks like NuGet restored package. Definitely restored that colorful console. It's running a build right now. It's definitely that old school Visual Studio massive build. You'll see when we go to that .NET build command for the command line, it's a whole lot faster. And so one of the big reasons I prefer it. I apologize. I have a little bit of sniffles today, but we're going to get through this webinar. All right. So once this is done running, I'm just going to pause for a second, see if anybody got any questions before we continue. Then we'll just move forward to the next step. And just showing that this job is finishing out and everything looks good. All right. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and just approve that this pipeline works. We can go ahead and delete this pipeline. Excuse me. And I'm gonna just to keep things simple, I'm gonna go ahead and just remove some of the stuff from this YAML file. The solution file and the README file, because we won't need it for the rest of this demo. So just removing excess stuff. Since we don't have a pipeline, it's not going to trigger any build or anything like that. We are good to go. Close the code space, and then just to show you, I'm going to go into code spaces and delete the code space since I don't need it anymore. All right, so I basically have a really simple console project here. I have a CS project file, really simple stuff right here. And I'm going to create a brand new pipeline, and I'm going to build this manually. Now, going back to my slide deck, I'm going to show you how I can build this manually. Now, going back to my diagram, I can actually use the concepts that we learned earlier to build this out from scratch without using the built-in tasks. So, first off, we're just going to worry about build today. So, we're going to create what's essentially called a single stage pipeline. So, that's usually consisting of build and test. We build by restoring our packages and then building our project, and we test by building our project and then running unit tests. So, if we were to talk to our developer team, regardless of what programming language we're using, we would say, hey, using a command line interface, how do we build and test? And they would tell us, if it's .NET, .NET Restore, .NET Run. If it's Node, npm install, and then Node, the name of the file, pip install, Python, gem install, Ruby. And, if it's the .NET CLI, you could just go and look up the reference and figure out, how do we, restore, how do we run? This is all stuff that we could just look at the docs and figure out how to do. So since we know how to do all this stuff from the command line, then that makes it pretty easy for us to take it to a step further and fill in the blanks for the steps that we want to do in our pipeline. So if we look at our pipeline visually, we can start replacing things with the CLI. So instead of just saying restore packages build, we just say .NET restore, .NET build. Instead of saying restore package or build and test, we just say .NET build, .NET test. So we start with our array of stages, and then we fill in names of stages. So we might have our continuous integration stage. We start with our array of jobs, and we fill in a list of jobs, like our build job. We start with our array of steps. And again, just like we talked about earlier, do we use a script or do we use a task? So for today, we're going to stick with our scripts. So we have our list of steps. We will run a script. Now, obviously, we can use tasks here too, but I'm going to focus on scripts. So .NET Restore will restore a NuGet package. .NET Build will build our project. And that's how we do a build. So let me show you what that one looks like. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up. We have our project here. I'm going to copy the URI so we can pull this up in Visual Studio Code on my local machine. So I have Visual Studio Code open up in an empty folder called dev, and I have Windows Terminal in that same folder. So I'm going to git clone by git repo or GitHub repo to that local folder. There we go. And I'm going to just create a folder called pipeline.yaml. And I'm going to just create a stages array with a stage called continuous. And this, I always struggle to spell this correctly. Continuous integration. And then this is going to create a jobs array with a single job called build. And within this, a steps array with a single script called .NET Restore, and another step with a single script called .NET Build. And this, make sure I have my syntax correct, should be everything I need to build my .NET project. So if I take this, commit .NET project build, and save it, and push it up to GitHub, nothing's going to happen. Let me go up here, make sure it got up there. There we go. So the pipeline YAML file has gotten here, but GitHub doesn't really care that there's a pipeline YAML file in here because GitHub knows nothing about Azure Pipelines. It's just saying, okay, there's a pipeline YAML file here. What does that mean? I have to actually go into Azure Pipelines and I have to say, hey, I want to create a new pipeline. My code's in GitHub. It's in this repository. I'll go to all repositories and I'll select my March 1st repository. Now, I have an existing Azure Pipelines YAML file, so my main branch. It's in this pipeline YAML file. Hit continue. And there's a nice little assistant where we can actually go in and, analyze this and stuff like that. But basically, I can say, hey, use that existing YAML file. Now, here, Azure Pipelines will parse this YAML file and run it. Now, this is the fun part. At this point in time, Azure Pipelines will determine if this is a valid YAML file and then run the workflow. So here you go. A couple things is going to happen. Azure Pipelines is going to pull an agent from a pool. It's going to determine parameters of that agent and then run commands. So the first command is going to run is a command line command. That's the script. This first one, just to show you, is to check out the code. So it checked out msusdev examples March 1st at the main branch. Then it ran .NET Restore for the command line. Then it ran .NET Build for the command line. Everything worked. Agent's done. I told you it'd be a whole lot faster because we were just running command line commands. We can expand upon this. We could go in. We could say, you know what? I want to know which version. I don't know anything about this agent that it ran on. I can do two things. One is I could add a script to do things like .NET version. I could add a command. I don't know, .NET run. Save that. Uh, Learn about the agent. Actually, let me not put a special character in there. Take it up. I'm pretty sure it's legal, but I just don't want to, play on a live on a live stream. Here we go. And I just want you to see this live build so you can see that, I've updated things. Here we go. We queued up this build. Just started to build. Couple more commands. This first command was .NET version 6.0.200. .NET restore. .NET build. .NET run. There's hello world. Interestingly enough, it didn't print out the colorful console. That's probably a side effect of this actually being a printed log output. Maybe it's in the browser, maybe how they get the log output out. I'm not sure. But that told me some things, but didn't tell me everything I need to know about the actual agent it ran on. But if you actually go to the build, you'll notice also interesting things. You go to job preparation parameters, it tells you some stuff. If you go to initialize job, it says host agent, agent machine name. If you go to virtual environment here, it'll tell you this Ubuntu 20.04 box with included software, where it'll actually tell you stuff about the machine that was they decided to use to run this build on. And you can see what software is installed on this machine. And you'll say, hold on, why did Azure Pipelines decide to run my build on an Ubuntu machine? I'm running on a Windows box. Why is it running on Ubuntu? And why is this software installed? Well, there's some defaults baked in, but you can actually influence Azure Pipelines and tell it, how you want it to run your build. Do you want it run on a specific machine? Do you want it to run in a container? We'll get to that in a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to put that like in the back of your mind for a little bit later in this webinar. One more thing I wanted to get to before we get to that. What other thing that stood out to me here is that this is useless. Just saying command line, command line, command line. I can't parse this as somebody looking at my build. I need better labels than this. So let's improve our labels. One really cool thing is you can add display names to these. So we have all of these script, stage, script, but all of these stage jobs, they support a property called display name where we can actually add in continuous. I got to spell it correctly. Continuous integration for display name for the stage for this job. Let's add display name build. with proper capitalization. Display name check dot check.net version. Display name for this one. Let's see. Restore npm packages. Or NuGet, not npm. Display name build.net project. Display name run.net project. Save. Improve display names. We'll call that. Run that, sync that change up, and go check out Azure Pipelines here. We'll see what that does for us. Go back to Azure Pipelines. Improve display names. There's our build. Yeah, nice capital B for build. Getting better. We're getting better already. And you can see here that we have these new display names, check.net version, restore.net. Well, restore NuGet packages, build.net project, run.net project, much, much better display names. And then one other thing I wanted to call out here, we also have just looking around, uh by default, we had Ubuntu as our VM image name, but we can also specify our own we can specify our own hosted agents. Now, the way we find those out is we can actually go into documentation. You kind of saw an example of this is when we went up to the initialized job. I believe it was initialized job. We went to virtual environment. We went to the GitHub page for the different images that are available for the pipelines. Like for instance, Windows 2019, Windows 2022. We saw the ones for Mac OS, the ones for Ubuntu Linux. This goes. There's so many different options available to you. Right now, I think Ubuntu latest was the default, but you can actually specify this yourself. So just put you can change this default by going to pool and changing the VM image property. So I believe the default is Ubuntu latest, and this allows you to change what machine is used. Now you can take this a step further because you can actually specify a container image. So, for example, if I wanted to um, do my build within the context of a Docker container. So, for example, if I want to do my build within the context of mcr.microsoft.com, .NET SDK 6. Actually, I think that's the correct. Let me double check real quick if that's the correct. Hub.docker.com, .NET SDK, .NET SDK 6, Docker. I just want to make sure that's the correct one for .NET SDK. Yeah, .NET SDK 6.0. .NET 6 SDK. Pop that up, set it up, and we'll just jump in and test that one out. Just give that a try. Let me make sure I set that up. And again, if you got any more questions, please, pop them in the chat. I want to make sure I didn't have any typos or anything. Pull VM image container. And then if we ever need to change the code, And there we go. There's a test build. All right, let's see. I have a typo in my YAML file. It says stages came after. I have a typo in one of my values. Let's see, pool, VM image, container stages. I have a typo somewhere. Stages, stage. See, let me just. And I'll fix this typo once the webinar is over and fix it in the show notes. There we go. It's running the corrected build. There we go. Typo fixed. So again, you got any questions? Throw them in the chat. We're coming up on the end. A couple of other things I wanted to point out here that's going to become um, two big things I wanted to point out about artifacts and publishing. Um, One of them that's going to become important when we talk about CI/CD, and that's really interesting is that when we get into stages with continuous integration, is that we're going to be able to create artifacts and publish them between stages. So, like, we're going to be able to take something from the continuous integration stage, create an artifact, push it somewhere, and then a continuous deployment stage, push it to like our production platform, our cloud platform. Even more interestingly, going to be able to use artifacts. Like, for instance, if we're reviewing pull requests and we want to be able to do like a test build and just be able to take a look at that test build without actually pushing it to prod, we're going to be able to use artifacts in that sense, and be able to use these stages and be able to do stuff like, for instance, do our pipeline up to a certain level in like 2 out of 3 of the stages of our pipeline. Is one of the powers of doing these multi-stage builds with Azure pipelines. So, this is a 3-part series. Really looking forward to having you all come participate in all 3 parts of our series. I want to share with you some of the links, and I'm gonna throw some of these on the chat right now before I share the links on the screen. We just throw some of these chats up there. Actually, I think Matt already shared one of these links. He already beat me to it. Um, let me So just reviewing what we went over, we talked about Azure pipelines. We just spun up a real quick console application. Used the pipeline template for that application. Then we went and built a pipeline from scratch for that .NET console application. We built it. For the application, we spun it up, we customized it, we added labels, we created a single stage pipeline. We did it using we used scripts instead of the built-in tasks, and then we were able to spin up. Even though I had a typo, we were able to spin up a container based pipeline. They were able to talk about how that worked, and then we talked about the built-in runners and agents for pipelines. Everything I showed you today is the basic components you're going to need to get started with pipelines. Everything you saw today, you should be able to just spin up a new project in Azure DevOps and create your own pipeline and get a build going right away. That way, when we come back with sessions 2 and 3 and do our first continuous integration flow, you'll be able to just get running. If you get stuck in sessions 2 or 3 and hey, I can't get a build working, you should be able to just jump back to this session and get unstuck. And if you got any questions, again, that's You can either go see our show notes for today at our GitHub repo, or just send us any questions at msusdev at Microsoft.com. Again, thanks for jumping on. I'm going to hang out for another minute or two in case anybody has any questions. But other than that, thanks for joining us today. I know you can probably hear me a little nasally today, so it probably sound a little weird. But thanks for hanging in there with me while we got to share with you all this really cool stuff, and really excited that I got to show you all these really cool demos today.